You could also have this particular genotype right here, this big B, little b, meaning you got what a big B or the brown-eyed allele from mom and the little b or the blue-eyed allele from dad. Because you have one copy of the brown-eyed allele, you're going to have brown eyes, but you could pass on the blue-eyed allele to your kids. So if you had two individuals with this same phenotype here, or with the same genotype, I'm sorry, that same genotype, they could both, in theory, pass on this little b right here. If they both pass on that little b to their kid, then that's why two brown-eyed people could potentially have a blue-eyed kid. The recessive trait, however, is usually masked or covered up by the dominant trait if it's there. In order to show this particular trait, you have to have both copies. You have to have both recessive alleles. You had to get one copy of the recessive allele from mom, and you had to get another copy from dad. So in humans, blue eyes is recessive. You have to have two of the recessive alleles to have blue eyes. Alrighty. When we do genetics problems, there's going to be three words that you're going to have to be really familiar with, or three phrases. First one is homozygous dominant. These are, by the way, these are all describing genotypes, the set of alleles. You can be homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, or heterozygous. Again, these words should kind of sound familiar because we talked about them on the Mendel and inheritance worksheets that you guys did. If you're homozygous dominant, homozygous means the same. So you're going to have the same. You're either going to have the same but dominant alleles, or you'll have the same recessive alleles. Excuse me. So that's why you have the second word here. If you're homozygous dominant, it's the same, and you have the same dominant alleles. So I went ahead and wrote that as capital R, capital R. You can also be homozygous recessive. Homozygous the same, recessive meaning the lowercase letters or the recessive trait. So you would have both recessive alleles, or in this case, two lowercase r's. The last one you can have is heterozygous, where you have a dominant and a recessive allele. Heterozygous means different. So that should make sense why you would have one dominant allele and one recessive allele. So homozygous dominant, two capital letters. Homozygous recessive, two lowercase letters. Heterozygous, one capital, one lowercase. When we do genetics problems, you will probably have to come back to this particular part of your notes and look up what does homozygous dominant mean? What does homozygous recessive mean? Most people need a little bit of practice before they have these memorized. Okay, last one. I will in the genetics problems that we're going to do, I'm going to ask you to calculate the ratios when you do these crosses. And what I mean by a ratio are these two ones right here, the genotypic ratio. Sometimes you'll see it called the genotypic frequency. That's a really old word, but I put it on there just in case you ever come across it in an upper level class. Same thing with phenotype. You have the phenotypic ratio or the phenotypic frequency, but usually you're going to see now ratio instead of frequency. So when I ask you to give me the genotypic ratio up here, I'm going to ask you for three numbers. The first number should be the number of homozygous dominant individuals. And these are all the offspring, by the way. So how many of the offspring are going to be homozygous dominant? How many of them are going to have those two capital letters? The next number will be how many of the offspring are heterozygous, or how many offspring have one dominant and one recessive allele. And then the third number is going to be the number of homozygous recessive individuals. How many of those individuals that have both recessive alleles, or the lowercase letters. You have to put a 0 in here if you get a 0. You can't just, let's say you have 0 homozygous dominant, 2 heterozygous and 2 homozygous recessive individuals, you have to put a 0 in that homozygous dominant. Otherwise, I don't know. You only gave me 2 numbers. Well, which number did you leave out? So in that case, you'd have to say the ratio is a 0 to 2 to 2. So just remember, you're going to have those placeholders. Your phenotypic ratio then is going to be how many of them are showing the dominant phenotype. Is that how many brown eyes versus blue eyes? So how many have straight hair versus curly hair? So whatever the dominant phenotype is to the number of recessive phenotypes. Again, you will probably have to reference this and that. You're probably going to have to go back to those 2 slides a lot when we're doing the genetics problems, just because those 5 vocabulary terms we use a lot. So tomorrow, after your quiz, we will practice going through some of the crosses. Like I said, they're not too terribly difficult. It's just getting used to this vocabulary. So as long as you have the vocabulary down, I think when we plug them into the genetics problems tomorrow, they'll make a little bit more sense. But for now, even if the definitions are still a little confusing, give it a little bit of time. Let's work on some problems tomorrow, and hopefully they'll make a little bit more sense. So the next thing you guys should be working on is the Socrative assignment. So just make sure that you are ready to take your quiz tomorrow. It's going to be over the cells. It's going to be over the different organelles and their jobs. It's going to be over the microscope and its parts. That classification of life activity, if you remember back with like Linnaeus and the different groups like the mammals and the birds and the reptiles and things like that. And then it's going to have a little bit of stuff on Mendel. So that worksheet about Mendel and the inheritance. So you might have like what's a chromosome, what's DNA, what kind of plant did Mendel work with, stuff like that. So I will be in the morning tomorrow at about 7:15 on Friday. So if you do want any help reviewing, I'll be there in the morning, and I'll also be online tonight at 7 p.m. So you can either email me or we can try to video conference on Google Hangouts. But if you do have other questions, feel free to email me, and I'll try to get to my email at some point today and respond back to you. But just make sure you're studying. Have a good day.